Lewis had always considered himself adaptable. 23 years of bouncing between Earth's overcrowded cities and various orbital stations had taught him to roll with whatever life threw his way. But nothing, absolutely nothing, had prepared him for this. The housing listing on the Nexus Station bulletin board had seemed straightforward enough. Shared quarters, 2 bedrooms available, common area included, affordable rent. What it hadn't mentioned was that his roommates would be aliens. Female aliens. Very confused female aliens. The door to apartment 847 slid open with a pneumatic hiss, revealing a space that was somehow both familiar and utterly foreign. Lewis stood in the doorway, his single duffel bag slung over his shoulder, staring at the 2 beings who had frozen mid-conversation to gape at him. "You must be the new tenant," said the taller of the 2, her voice carrying a melodic quality that universal translators could never quite capture naturally. She was Valkyrie, if Lewis remembered his xenobiology classes correctly, slender and graceful, with skin that shimmered between blue and purple depending on the lighting. Her eyes, large and golden, blinked at him with what he could only describe as bewilderment. "Lewis Grant," he said, extending his hand in the traditional human greeting before realizing that might not translate. "I, signed the lease last week." The second alien, shorter and covered in what looked like fine, silvery fur, made a sound somewhere between a chirp and a gasp. She was Nixarian, her species known throughout the galaxy for their technical expertise and apparently their skittishness around new situations. "Anya," the Valkyrie said, still staring at Lewis's outstretched hand, "I think the housing agency made an error." "An error?" Anya's voice was higher-pitched, almost musical. Her large, dark eyes widened further. "Zyra, that's a human, a male human." "I can see that," Zyra replied, her skin flickering to a deeper purple, embarrassment Lewis guessed. Lewis slowly lowered his hand. "Is there a problem? The listing didn't mention any species restrictions." Both aliens exchanged glances that spoke volumes in whatever silent language roommates developed. Finally, Zyra stepped aside, gesturing for him to enter. No problem," she said, though her tone suggested otherwise. "We were just expecting someone different." "Someone female," Anya added helpfully, earning a sharp look from Zyra. Lewis stepped inside, the door sealing shut behind him with a finality that made him wonder if he'd made a terrible mistake. The apartment was larger than he'd expected, decorated in a style that blended various cultural aesthetics, Valkyrie minimalism mixed with Nixarian functionality, and inexplicably, what looked like an earth plant struggling in the corner. "I tried to keep the fern alive," Anya said, following his gaze. "I read that humans like greenery, but I think I may have overwatered it or underwatered it. The instructions were contradictory." Despite the awkwardness, Lewis felt a smile tugging at his lips. "I appreciate the effort. I can probably save it." "Really?" Anya's fur rippled with what seemed like pleasure. "Oh, that would be wonderful. I've killed 3 already." The first week was an exercise in mutual confusion and careful avoidance. Lewis quickly learned that Zyra was a communications specialist at the station's main hub, working odd hours that meant she was often asleep when he was awake. Anya, meanwhile, worked in the engineering bay, her nimble fingers perfect for the delicate repair work that kept the station functioning. They learned about him too, though mostly through observation and the occasional brave question. He worked in cargo logistics, managing the endless flow of supplies that kept Nexus Station alive. It was boring work, but it paid enough for him to save up for eventual passage back to Earth, or perhaps one of the colony worlds. The breakthrough came on the 8th night, when Lewis found both of his roommates standing in the common area, staring at the kitchen unit with identical expressions of defeat. "Problem?" he asked. "The food synthesizer is malfunctioning," Zyra explained. "Again, we've been trying to fix it for an hour. It keeps producing something that smells like sulfur and despair," Anya added miserably. Lewis set down his data pad and rolled up his sleeves. Mind if I take a look? What followed was a crash course in interspecies cooperation. While Anya provided technical expertise and Zyra consulted the manual, Lewis applied what his grandfather had always called percussive maintenance, a carefully placed hit in exactly the right spot. The synthesizer hummed back to life, producing something that actually resembled food. "How did you know to do that?" Anya asked, her eyes wide with fascination. "Old Earth tech is temperamental," Lewis explained. "My grandfather used to say machines are like people. Sometimes they just need a good thump to remember what they're supposed to do." Zyra's skin shifted to an amused amber. "That's the most human thing I've ever heard." After that, the ice began to thaw. They fell into an easy routine, learning to navigate each other's quirks and customs. Lewis discovered that Velkari couldn't tolerate Earth coffee. It made Zyra's skin flash through colors like a malfunctioning light show. Anya, meanwhile, had developed an inexplicable addiction to human music, particularly something called classic rock that she played at volumes that made the walls vibrate. In return, they taught him about their cultures. Zyra explained the complex social structures of Velkar, where color communication was as important as verbal speech. Anya introduced him to Nixarian cuisine, which was surprisingly delicious once you got past the fact that everything was slightly bioluminescent. But it was the small moments that truly bonded them. Lewis fixing Anya's broken holoframe that displayed pictures of her family back on Nixar. Zyra teaching him the basics of color speak so he could tell when she was tired or stressed. The three of them huddled around the viewscreen, watching Earth movies that required constant explanation and resulted in endless questions about human culture. "Wait," Anya said during one such movie night, "humans actually used to fight with swords, while riding animals." "Knights and horses," Lewis confirmed. "Medieval period, very romantic in retrospect, probably terrifying in reality." "Your species is insane," Zyra said, but her skin glowed with amused pink. The real test came 3 months into their cohabitation, during what would become known as the incident. Lewis woke to alarms blaring through the station, not the drill kind, but the real, "this is an emergency" kind. He stumbled into the common area to find his roommates already there, Anya frantically checking her data pad while Zyra's skin flashed urgent red. "Hull breach in Section 12, Anya said without preamble. "Engineering is locked down. I can't get to my post." "Communications is trying to coordinate evacuation," Zyra added, "but half the translators are down. It's chaos." Lewis's mind raced. Section 12 was too close. They had maybe 20 minutes before the breach affected their section. "We need to help." "We're not emergency personnel," Zyra protested. "No," Lewis agreed, "but we're here and people need help." What followed was a blur of activity. Lewis used his cargo clearances to access emergency supplies and evacuation routes that others couldn't reach. Anya's technical skills helped seal secondary bulkheads, buying precious time. Zyra coordinated with her communications team, using her color speak to communicate silently with other Velkari personnel when verbal channels were overloaded. They worked as a unit, anticipating each other's needs, covering each other's weaknesses. When they finally made it to an evacuation point with a group of stranded civilians, the immediate danger had passed. Emergency crews had sealed the breach, and station integrity was restored. As they collapsed against a wall, exhausted and still shaking from adrenaline, Anya started laughing, a high, slightly hysterical sound. "What?" Lewis asked. "I just realized," she said between giggles, "we're the weirdest disaster response team in the galaxy. A human, a Velkari, and a Nixarian walk into an emergency." "It sounds like the start of a bad joke," Zyra finished, her skin shifting to relieved green. Then she too started laughing. Lewis joined in, and they sat there in the corridor, 3 unlikely roommates who had somehow become something more. Later, back in the apartment, they shared a meal from the temperamental synthesizer. The fern in the corner had new growth, small but thriving. "You know," Lewis said, breaking the comfortable silence, "when I first moved in, I thought this was going to be the most awkward living situation of my life." "And now?" Anya asked. He looked at them, these two aliens who had become his friends, his family in this corner of space so far from Earth. "Now I can't imagine living anywhere else." Zyra's skin glowed warm gold. "The housing agency may have made an error," she said, echoing her words from that first day. "But I think it was a good one." Anya raised her glass, filled with some bioluminescent Nixarian beverage that Lewis had learned to tolerate. "To good errors." "To weird roommates," Zyra added. "To humanity," Lewis finished with a grin, "and to the aliens who put up with us." They clinked glasses, three beings from three different worlds, sharing one apartment and building something that transcended species, culture, and the vast distances between stars. In the end, Lewis thought, home wasn't a planet or even a station. Home was wherever your people were, even if those people happened to have purple skin and silvery fur. The galaxy was vast and strange, but in apartment 847B, three souls had found exactly where they belonged.